Hi, I'm Richard from Early Retirement Wanderlust, and it's the first Thursday of the month, which means it's Wellbeing Thursday. And today I want to go through a book review of a book that was pivotal in my early years from back in the day. It is The Chimp Paradox by Professor Steve Peters. Hi, so welcome back, and if you're new to the channel, I'm Richard from Early Retirement Wanderlust, and on the first Thursday of every month we focus on everything to do with well-being, and we discuss a whole variety of things, and occasionally we do a book review as well. So today I am wanting to review Professor Steve Peters' pivotal book for me, The Chimp Paradox. A little bit of history behind the book. It's an old book. It came about as a consequence of the 2012 London Olympics, when you may recall that Team GB had incredible amount of success in the cycling. In those days, Team GB were known for searching out marginal gains, and they did everything possible to make those 1% differences to secure as many medals as they possibly could. One of those marginal gains was to start focusing on the power of the human mind as well as the power of the human body, and many Olympians have waxed lyrical about the difference that Dr. Steve Peters made in terms of their mindset, their confidence and their mental preparedness for competing at the highest levels. Since I first read the book shortly after it was produced, I've used it quite a lot in my own life. I've used it throughout my teaching career to try and help young people understand how their brain works, and what I want to do in this video is to take you through the basic principles of the book, which is a little bit psychology and brain science, but then how we can use that information to help us lead a more fulfilled and a calmer lifestyle. The basic premise of the book is that it introduces the idea of the chimp being a metaphor for our very impulsive, very primitive part of the human brain that we actually have very little control over, just as a consequence of how our brain has evolved over the hundreds and thousands of years of us being human beings. So way back in the day, our human brains developed from our central nervous system, and that is basically our brain stem that comes up through our spine, and it was designed purely to keep us alive. And now we've got to be really thankful for that, because if it didn't keep us alive and it didn't stop us being eaten by saber-toothed tigers, and we wouldn't be here today as a human race. So that was absolutely essential. But what's really important is that part of our brain has stayed there throughout time, and then as a human race we have developed our brain around that basic concept. And the thing that makes us different from most mammals is that we have a large part of the brain at the front, which is what makes us human. And then another part of the brain that's developed is a smaller section in the central midbrain that is probably our sort of computer part of the brain. The whole concept of the book comes down to these three particular areas. So the chimp area, a small area that's probably no bigger than the size of a walnut, is that thing that overrides everything to keep us safe. It's our fight or flight stimulus. It is something that really fires in cases of emergencies, fires up our adrenaline systems and gets us to safety. Now, back in the day when we were wandering around the jungle and we were in danger of being attacked by saber-toothed tigers, that was really important because we didn't want to think too much when we heard that growl. We wanted to actually get up the nearest tree, so we needed that burst of energy to escape. Unfortunately, that system is still ticking away in the background. So whenever it perceives that we are at risk, it will fire off and it overrules every other part of that enormous brain. The next part of the brain is that front bit of the brain that makes us human, and it is everything to do with the traits that we have as human beings. So that rational thinking, our logical thinking, our ability to take in information, process it and come up with an effective solution as to how we are going to solve that problem. And one of the ways we do that is by using the third part of the brain, which is our computer. Now, that computer holds all the information that we've gathered throughout our life. And when we are trying to make a human decision, we hook into that computer and try and pull stuff back from the past. So what this brain science actually comes down to is that we have the power within our brains to make really rational decisions based on our past experiences, but all of that can be written off by a primitive response by the chimp that lives within our brain, within that little walnut-sized piece of brain that overrides everything and comes up with an irrational, an impulsive, and a sort of fight or flight response that we would never naturally come up with if it was down to our human thinking. So now that we understand that we've got this chimp component of our brain, we actually have to find ways that we can manage that chimp's behavior, because it's not going to go away. It's an integral part of our brain that we need to learn to live with. We need to be able to recognize when the chimp has taken over control. We need to find ways of calming the chimp down and allowing ourselves time to be able to make that more rational human response to a particular situation. And there are a variety of ways that we can do that. We can first of all acknowledge that the chimp has taken over. We can then find ways to slow our system down. So that might be breathing techniques, or just simply taking a pause and thinking before we respond, and just building that time for our human part of the brain to just take over, come up with a logical and human response, and actually put that into place, rather than allowing the impulsive chimp to just run wild with our thoughts and our actions. One of the ways that this book has really helped me is it's given me a real sense of perspective about how my brain works. Prior to understanding that I'd got this little chimp running around in my brain that was making decisions that I had no control over, I used to take it really personally. I used to think it was something that was wrong with me, that I was somehow reacting in an uncontrolled way. Whereas now I can sort of depersonalize that. It's nothing to do with me as a person. It's just natural evolution. And what's really important is I develop the skills, the knowledge, and the understanding to be able to control or calm the chimp, and then allow me the space to be able to make a rational and logical human decision over anything that occurs within my life. One of the things that the book repeatedly emphasizes is the importance of building a supportive environment for both the chimp part of our brain and the human part of our brain to be able to live together and to be able to operate together. This includes such things as making sure we surround ourselves with positive influences, make sure that we have positive people in our lives, that we are clear about our goals and what we want to achieve out of life, and that we practice self-discipline so that we're not always giving in to those impulsive responses, but we are finding ways to give ourselves time to come up with a human reaction for any given situation. So what I want to do now is to go through 5 really simple tips and tricks for applying the Chimp Paradox into our everyday lives. The first thing you can do is to just recognize when the chimp is taking over your thinking. So when you are angry, impulsive, or illogical, just recognizing that moment and accepting that it's a perfectly natural reaction. However, even though it's a perfectly natural reaction, it's not always a helpful reaction. If we can become more adept at recognizing when our chimp is actually in control, we are going to be better at building space and time for our human brain, which is the more powerful part of our brain, to take over, come up with a logical response, and actually initiate that response. For me, this understanding of the chimp component of my brain and actually recognizing when it takes over has been a really pivotal moment in my development. It naturally makes you a calmer person, it makes you less impulsive, and for me, what's really important is that that inner voice that has been so critical in the past isn't actually blaming me, because it's nothing to do with me. It's just brain science, and it's a perfectly natural reaction that I've got to respond to. Once I've recognized the chimp is taking over, then's the time to start practicing and learning some new emotional management techniques. That may be something as simple as just taking a few deep breaths. It might be the old adage of counting to 10. It might be going for a walk and removing yourself from a situation so that you've got time to think. And with all of these techniques that are available to us, what's really important is finding out what works for you and what you can rely on in the future. They don't all work in all situations, and they don't all work for all individuals. So when I was working, it was just not appropriate to get up and walk out of a meeting. I had to find ways of controlling my emotions within that environment that were appropriate to that environment. And as anything, the more skills that you have, the more tools that you have in your toolkit, the more prepared you are for different situations. So it's just getting out and practicing those emotional management techniques. We have a very real opportunity to reprogram the computer part of our brain with a much more positive set of responses and experiences. The more time we devote to putting positive habits and proactive habits into our computer, the more that bank of experiences grows. And when our human brain is looking for a more appropriate response back in our memories, it's going to be more likely to pull out positive responses than negative responses, which is going to really calm the chimp down. And it's important to remember that this is just not going to happen overnight. Our computer part of the brain is just full of our life experiences, and we are not going to be able to reprogram those straight away. But by bringing more positivity into our life, then we are going to slowly but surely make that computer memory bank much more positive and much more proactive in taking over those chimp responses. One of the things that I've definitely learned over time is the chimp part of my brain absolutely loves chaos, and what it doesn't like is order and stability. So I need to build an environment around me that mitigates against chaos and also extenuates the positives of order. The way that I do that personally is I think about the people that I choose to spend my time with, and I naturally try to avoid drama, avoid crisis, avoid anything that could be described as chaos. I try and make sure that my living environment is as calm as I possibly can get it, that it's well organized, that I know where everything is. It may feel like a bit of a sort of control freak response, but it is something that brings a calmness and a serenity to my environment. And if I'm then exposing myself to that environment, there's going to be less chance of my chimp going off on one and less need for me to actually control it. So making sure that I've got a controlled environment and a calm and a supportive environment has just been a real game changer for me. Like all things in life, things tend to change in terms of how our brain works. So it's really important to take time out to reflect and adjust our responses depending on how our brain is developing. Now, the way I review how things are going is obviously through my daily journaling. I don't do anything particularly specific based on this whole how my brain works in my journal, but I do take time every week to look back over the course of the last week, think about how I responded to particular situations, and think about perhaps how I could have done that better. And that's the whole learning cycle, because there is unfortunately no one size fits all in terms of managing the chimp within our mind. It develops just the same way as we develop as human beings, and what we've got to do is make sure that we have a way of keeping track of how the chimp's behavior is changing and finding ways to just continue to manage that behavior. So that's it, my views on the Chimp Paradox by Dr. Steve Peters. It's an oldie, but it's a goodie, and it's something that's been in my life for a number of years and has brought me a great deal of comfort. I think probably the biggest thing that it boils down to is that I've stopped blaming myself for some of my responses, because I actually understand that it's more of an evolutionary response, and that what I've got to do is I've got to get better at managing my chimp and coming up with more human reactions when the pressure comes on. So that's it from this month's Wellbeing Thursday. If you've got any comments, please pop them in the comments below, because I love to respond to those, and I love to hear your thoughts on some of the things that this book has raised. But we will see you next month. Thanks ever so much. Bye.